On the 21st of June 1941, we were given orders to cross the border into Russia at 2 a.m. the next morning. All along the front, hundreds of thousands of troops moved forward, in tanks, planes, in personnel carriers, on horseback and on foot.
Zum Sterben und zum meiner Ruhe, zum Sterben und zu meiner Ruhe.
Ambassador de Kazanov and I were summoned to the Foreign Office at 4 a.m. on the 22nd of June 1941. I told the men from the Foreign Office I would call a car and be there directly. The Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop's car is waiting at the embassy's gates, I was told down the phone line. Von Ribbentrop and the other members of the Foreign Office were somber. At 2 a.m. this morning, German troops crossed the border into the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics. As we left his office, von Ribbentrop came quickly after us. "Tell them in Moscow that I was against this war," he whispered into my ear. "Tell them that I tried to persuade Hitler against it, that it can only mean disaster for Germany," he said. I looked silently at him. There was nothing I could say to him.
The Soviet Union was a vast territory made up of many states. The Communist Party maintained control over these hundreds of millions of people through a system of regional party officials known as commissars. In an attempt to disrupt the communications in territories occupied by the Germans, Hitler passed an order known as the Kommissarbefehl, instructing specially formed SS units to arrest and execute commissars, political activists, and resistance fighters. An unwritten adjunct to this order was the arrest and execution of all Jews. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were rounded and executed by firing squad, or gassed to death in specially constructed vans that allowed the carbon monoxide to be released into the compartment of the van loaded with Jews.
We marched sometimes as much as 40 kilometers a day. There were no paved roads, and as the weather turned bad, we had mud and snow to deal with. Along the way, we could see signs of the battles Napoleon had fought 120 years earlier. The weather got worse, blizzards and freezing rain. We were still in our summer uniforms, and there were many casualties just from the bitter cold. There was nowhere to get warm. The Russian peasants lived in primitive wood huts, and the only source of heat was a stove in the center of the room. The peasants often slept on top of the stove to stay warm at night.
Stalin would not speak to anyone for weeks after the invasion. He was in a state of shock. How could Hitler have done this to him at this time? But as the Germans approached Moscow, Stalin refused to allow the government to relocate. He intended to hold Moscow whatever the cost.
We were 27 kilometers from the Kremlin. I could have shot a supercharged shell from my cannon and hit it from where I was. The Russians fought furiously. Stalin sent hundreds of thousands of troops at us in waves. We opened fire at men who were running straight for us. They were easy targets. They were certain to be cut down, but still, after them would come another wave and another wave. Later I saw that many of these men were Siberians.
What was happening now in Europe was a conflict between different people. Different people with different goals in mind. Stalin was now on the same team as the Western democracies. This he always found very amusing. But to the Allies he was very valuable. Stalin's army could burn up the flame of Nazi Germany. And then Hitler and his party could be snuffed out without as high cost. And then there was a bonus, that all this time the Russian army would also be burning itself up.
They were determined to save Moscow, and they knew how to fight in the winter better than we did. We were exhausted. They had new equipment. Ours was worn out. They were motivated. We were becoming demoralized. The irony of the vaunted German army being fought to a standstill by a people whom our government described as subhuman.
Stalin was not stupid. He knew that the Allies were letting him wear himself down. He made his decisions with open eyes. He would try and get as much from this war as he could, just like the others.